So the next one shows you what our tornado plot looks like. We've been focusing on the source characterization, so you've seen this part of the plot before. The blue ranges were what we were dealing with in 2011. The red points are what had come out of the improvements of the model from the particularly, for example, slip rate on the Hosgri in terms of reducing uncertainty. But what you see on top of that is the range that we are working with of the cost of taking global models and assuming they apply to my site-specific application. Okay? So that cost is broad uncertainty. And so you can see the value of what is the sigma, standard single station sigma model, what's the range of the site amplification, and what's the range of the medians from the GMPEs. So there, and probability, right? So this is a ratio of the y-axis, not the ground motions are larger, but you can see we're looking at factors of 10 to 20 or more. Okay? So these become really dominant, and it's hard to, so improvements down in the source characterization, while we can still do better, are going to be looking through the blurred glasses of the ground motion world that you really can't do much better to refine our total uncertainty.
What is the time-dependent hazard?
The time-dependent hazard is just looking at saying we calculated earthquake rates or long-term slip rates, but is there a periodic, is it going accelerating and changing over time instead of a Poisson recurrence rate? Okay. The top two on there are sort of similar to what we're talking about for the site and the median GMPE, but what if we could pull out the path term? Okay. So right now, if I say, I believe there is a path term, I just don't know it. Okay, so now we've run the hazard analysis for a whole suite of different alternative values of what that path term could be, sampling the full range with, in this case, total ignorance. So we have a broad uncertainty range. Then you can see what's there at the top, which is our biggest uncertainty range. So now this is our largest piece. And to move forward, if you really want to reduce uncertainty and hazard, you have to take on that piece. We can't do better with the medians from the global models because those are always going to be differences in what is from a global average to my site. Okay, and I'm never going to get there until I start to get the site-specific and path-specific data to be able to take on those top branches of the model. The next one. So we've been talking to the seismology and earthquake hazard community about this. So how do you reduce uncertainties in hazard? So for low probabilities used in nuclear power plants, we're on the steep part of the hazard curve. So this conclusion doesn't apply to all hazard calculations. It's really to critical facilities where you're pushing yourself to low probabilities. So for steep hazard curves here, the hazard uncertainty is much more sensitive to the ground motion model than to the source characterization because that slope is about 3. Okay, so there's sort of 3 times the leverage of a change in the ground motion model compared to a change in the source model. So the key improvements are really going to come by site and source specific ground motion models, not another round of updating the worldwide models. We'll keep doing that. That's still be done over up here, and they'll have another range, but that's really not going to get at our fundamental issue here, and that is we're taking a model for an average site condition and earthquake condition around the world and saying our site is that. So the way you can get at this is site-specific ground motion models for path terms and then, or site-specific ground motion models. I shouldn't have put that. This is just the site terms, and then the path-specific has both the site and the path terms. So can you correct, just write site terms in there instead of path terms? So the next one, I think some of you were at the SCEC annual meeting last year where I talked about this problem and how to move forward. So how do we constrain path effects? What are our options? So you can mainly use small earthquakes because that's the way you can get a lot of data. The path terms are linear, right? So we're not worried about nonlinear behavior. So the little earthquakes and even microtremor can be used to start to help you on this. Currently, though, we still don't have dense enough coverage to get out to some of the issues that we've just discussed. To fill in, you can do numerical simulations with the 3D crustal model, so you can can do that for dense coverage if your model is accurate enough to give you that density. So then you have a whole issue of the validation and calibration of your 3D model. I won't talk to you about this, but we did look at, do we get similar results between data and observations looking at data in Southern California from CyberShape versus the NGA West 2 models that have overlapping regions, and we can compare path effects. The answer was the site effects they were getting were good. The path effects, some were improvements, and in some areas of the model they were actually not working very well. That is, we have to have empirical calibration of this. You can't just say that here's a 3D crustal model, believe my results, and move forward.
We were having trouble getting the 3D crustal models simulations to work for any kind of high frequencies.
Correct. That's being addressed now, so they...
It was kind of getting sort of calibrated at like 3 seconds and longer or something like that.
Correct, and that's what this check was done, but they can now run them to 5 hertz. So that's been a big...
They're working on getting it to somewhere that's relevant to the problem here.
Correct, and so the next one is for path of terms. If we're going to get to 3D simulations, we need an applicable 3D velocity structure in the Central Coast region that there hasn't been a good model developed. But it also requires validation, not of the arrival times, but of the amplification. That's what we care about, is amplification. So that has to have some ground motion data to be able to test parts of the model. Okay? Empirical data, again, will be limited to small earthquakes for path effects, because that's the only way we're going to get enough recordings to get at it. And then there's an issue about how we extrapolate path effects to larger magnitudes, because a big earthquake isn't a point anymore. It's rupturing over a volume. We think we can use the simulations to help us get at understanding that behavior. We did look at some of that for the CyberShape runs and found for the big earth ruptures, the path effect from the closest point of the rupture was similar to the path effect for the whole thing, but that still needs quite a bit of checking. Next one. So, does it make sense? So, are we ready to take this problem on? This is really what I had presented at SCEC, and then there's been a workshop at SCEC in August and one at the USGS in November, where essentially we're asking them this question: can you do this? Do we have the data to work to take this problem on? And so the conclusions are really there is adequate data currently to start to build a model. SCEC is in particular using microtremor and data to build 3D crustal models as a first cut at the velocity structure, but also then using the available data to build a 3D model. The 3D simulations now are fast enough to allow rapid feedback, and this is really a key, that they can turn these around in about a month so that you can see the results, compare them to your data and observation, change the model and have feedback and rerun it. If this took 2 years to run, you can't get that. So that's really a huge step forward just in the calculation speed that's available. And I didn't put this down here, but we're able to run now, again, numbers of 5 hertz are feasible at this point. Really though, we're going to need additional seismic stations to start to get enough data to really start to constrain what's going on. We're severely spatially aliased right now. You know, we have samples and they're 10 kilometers apart. What's happening in between those 10 kilometers is an issue. We're looking at traditional seismic stations, but I think there's got to be a new concept of inexpensive alternatives to how do you get out 10,000 or 100,000 instruments and they can't be the kind of scientists normally want to work with. It's got to be a different thing. Similar to how the oil industry puts out huge sets of sensors when they do their surveys. I think there's solutions to this, but it needs a different approach. The other part is checking this whole approach to going to areas where there's good coverage right now. One suggestion is the Anza area in Southern California, where there's a whole lot of data and earthquakes, and can you see how much improvement is possible with this method? Again, and testing of path terms, I think they'll need some new metrics to really quantify how good they're getting at that. And really this is a multi-year application stage. So we're thinking about this in our future, moving towards, let's say, a 2025 10-year update of the hazard for Diablo Canyon. And I think that's it. I'm almost on time.
Yeah, one of my questions was, how much is this going to get done by March?
Not
Yeah.
So this is part, so what I've been getting from the SCEC and the USGS is really feasibility and how do you get started on this whole thing. But to make big improvements in our understanding of the hazard, we have to take on the path effects. I think anything else, we're just kind of fooling ourselves.
In terms of what we have to look at in the current evaluation of the hazard plan, the top of the tornado that you have a value you're proposing on is that the site amplification in the sigma SS model. The things above that are data intensive that you're not going to
So
you're not telling us anything new about.
that's right. So what you'll see in March, we'll have, can you go back to the tornado part? So it will have the green ones in it, okay, and so that comes out of the Swiss model.
Okay, that's clean.
So we will, and I should say, the two top ones are not going to be there, okay, because that's really a future, a new approach that no one is using at this time. Okay, but
No one is using because
they don't have the data.
don't even have 2 data points to hang anything on.
Correct. So there is a workshop in the Europeans are starting to look at this. So this is coming back to Bayesian updating of seismic hazard. So if you think of your global model as your assumed model, and then you start to use the path effects to update that model in a Bayesian way. So that's one framework that this really works well in. So that's going to be discussed in February, so next month, in terms of the feasibility of this approach. Okay?